Pixies, and welcome to or back to my channel. It's Zoe here, and today we're doing what I believe is the most anticipated video of the year, and those are my favorite books of 2024, the best books I read this year. It's just so exciting. I'm filming this hopefully on the day that this goes up, December 31st, so we're really close to the end of the year. I will not be reading a single other book that I will finish this year. I haven't even started a book as I speak, and I still have to edit this, obviously. But I'm just so excited to talk about all the books that I loved this year, because really, I had a really great reading year. Like, I have multiple books that I would consider brand new favorites, and ones that I really loved, even if I don't consider them favorites. So here I have all of my 9 out of 10s for the year, and I have some of my 8 out of 10s. And if you're new here, I don't blame you. If you are, I rank on a system of 10 because it just allows me to be more honest with my feelings. The only books in my collection that are 10 out of 10 are actually the original Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. I love those 5 books with all my heart. It's part because they're fantastic, part nostalgia, part Greek mythology, part middle grade fantasy adventure. It just ticks all those boxes for me, and I don't believe anything can really stack up to those original 5 books, in my opinion, for me. So those are the only books that are 10 out of 10. But 9 out of 10s is basically my version of a 5-star. So like, I really love those books. They're brand new favorites. I can't stop thinking about them. They just lack that they're not Percy Jackson, or some of them might be, we'll see. So yeah, I have all of my 9 out of 10s here. This year I have 8 9 out of 10 books, and if you think I'm being really picky, I am a little bit picky for my 9 out of 10s. But compared to 2023, I only read 2 books that entire year that I considered to be a 9 out of 10. And then I have a few of my 8 out of 10s here, which brings the total to this video to 15. And my 8 out of 10s, it was really hard to pick because I had a ton of 8 out of 10s this year, which means like they're almost perfect. Like the 9 out of 10s, they're new favorites, but there's some things that I probably would have changed or tweaked about them, or they didn't have the factors that I absolutely love to bring them to the 9 out of 10 category. I also just want to mention that on this list, I will not be mentioning rereads. And the reason I do that is because, one, I read Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I reread it every single year, and that would just automatically take this top spot every single year. And also, if I reread a book, it's usually because I like the book. But there will be an exception to that this year, and I will get to it when I talk about that book, which should be fairly soon because it's in the 8 out of 10 category. Also, my final disclaimer before we hop on into the video is that these books aren't ranked in any particular order. Like, I will tell you when I am out of the 8 out of 10s and into the 9s. The only thing that matters is like the top spot. Like, that's the only thing that matters, is the top spot. So now, with all that chatting out of the way, let's just talk about all of the books. And the first book I have on my 8 category list is actually my only book on the list that is not a fantasy book, and that is Sky Without Stars. Sky Without Stars is a young adult sci-fi trilogy, and Sky Without Stars is the first book. As you can see here, I've only read the first book this year, and this is a sci-fi retelling of Les Miserables. Now, I've never read Les Miserables or watched it or watched the play, to be completely honest with you, but I was completely enamored with this book. In this book we follow 3 characters, and they are all living very different lives on La Terre. And La Terre is a part of this new solar system that humanity has gone to, and the family who picked this planet, and they were the ruling class, and they built this great dome and had all these people build it because this planet is very rainy and wet, and this dome allows them to see light, which never really happens on La Terre. It allows them to see light, allows them to enjoy things, and allows them to not be miserable and cold. But after the dome was built, they kicked out the lower class, so only the top 2 classes reside there. So we follow one character who is from the dome, one character who's from outside the dome, and one character who is a part of a secret a secret rebel group who lives underground. She actually has no idea that she is part of a rebel group. And in this world, the written word has been forgotten, and that leads all these characters into meeting and watching their fates become intertwined. This book is fast-paced, as in there's always something happening, but for the overall story, I would say the plot's rather slow because it really takes a while for all these people to get together, or two of them interact at a time, but never the third is with them. I really enjoyed reading it, and I'm not a sci-fi girly. Obviously the rest of the books on my list are fantasy books. I love fantasy, but I was really impressed with this, and I had just tried the first chapter. It was supposed to be trying the first chapter video, but it just never came to fruition. And I just was so obsessed with it. This is the only book I read from the video that I filmed that never posted, to be completely honest with you. I even kept some of the others, but I haven't read them yet. This was the only one that was oh, I need to read that right now after I read it. And I've never heard of anyone talk about this. I just thought it was written really well. Everything was really intriguing. I don't know how it compares to Les Miserables, obviously, but it was the inspiration for this book. And now I'm more interested in reading that in the future. And I'm also really excited to continue on with this series. The next book I want to talk about is The Faithless Hawk. And this is the second book of the Merciful Crow duology. And I read The Merciful Crow back in 2023, and I was obsessed with the first book. But for some reason, I just didn't get around to reading this book. And so I made it a priority to read this one back in the fall. And I'm so glad I did, because I'm kicking myself that I didn't read it sooner in 2023, because it would have been one of my favorite books of the year along with Merciful Crow. And in this world, we follow Fee, and Fee is a crow. And crows are a part of the caste system of this world, and crows are at the very, very bottom because their patron god has left them with no powers. But they are still useful to the caste system because they are the only ones who can survive the sinner's plague. So all the other castes, they are affected by the sinner's plague, which basically means if they die and they're infected, then they'll infect everyone else and everyone else will die. So the crows come and perform their mercy on them, which is just killing them and then taking the body and burning it. And their compensation is supposed to be money, but also the bones of some of the other witches, because in this world some of the people can possess magic and some of them aren't as magical. And the ones who can possess magic, every caste and every class, there's sparrow and swan and peacock and all of these things, they all have a certain ability. But the crow's ability, their witch's ability, is to be able to use the bones of other witches, specifically their teeth, and they can use their power for a short amount of time. And the crows really aren't treated very well. They're just seen as a nuisance and as cleaning up everything. But then Fee and her father are summoned to the capital of this country because the crown prince has come down with the sinner's plague. Except when they get there, he is not sick at all. But there is actually a government conspiracy happening where his stepmother is trying to take the throne by killing him. I feel like that was a little bit rambly, but I just think the magic in the caste system is so integral to this book that it has to be explained at least a little bit. This duology is so good, and no one talks about it at all. I know some people talk about the series this author is currently writing, but I've never seen anyone mention this duology, and it's so good. I've never read a book where a caste system and a magic system is so integral to the plot of the story. Everything is just happening at once. It's YA fantasy, so it's very, very fast-paced. But it's also just written really, really well. And this is not a short book. While it might look shorter than some books on this list, the font is pretty tiny. Especially for a YA book. YA is usually a lot larger on the page. I thought this was so, so good. I'm definitely going to be rereading this duology in the future. I think it does really interesting, unique things, and I think more people need to read this one. And now let's talk about some of the books that I don't have physically here with me. And the first one is The Winter Duke. In this world, in this country, there is a kingdom that sits atop a frozen lake. And in this kingdom, we follow the main character. She is one of 13 siblings, and they're all kind of bloodthirsty because they all want to be the Winter Duke. They all want the title, except for her. She wants to go and study in a different kingdom far away. She wants to study in the sciences, I think specifically biology. And all she's waiting for is her father to announce who is going to be his heir so she can leave, because that's the deal she made with her family. But then the night before, like, her brother's going to be named the next duke, all of her family members, from her brothers and sisters to her mother and father, are in a like magical enchanted sleep. No one can wake them up. They're barely breathing. And so she by default is made the Winter Duke. So she has to pick her own like companion. She has to pick her own bride. She has to figure out the politics of everything. She's never studied. She was never interested in being the Duke. And the part of the reason being Duke is so prestigious and everyone is there to watch the Duke be crowned is that the Duke is the one who has access to the world below. Because there is a kingdom below the ice that this kingdom is set on, and they are the only beings in the world that have magic. And therefore, through a deal with the Winter Duke is the only person above who has magic themselves. This is really, really interesting. This is a political fantasy, really heavy on the political. This is like fast-paced in a way that only takes place over a course of a few days, but it doesn't feel fast-paced because so many things happen that makes these days feel like forever long. Because she's trying to figure out politics, she's also trying to figure out how to cure her family. Even though she doesn't really like them, she just doesn't want to be Duke. But then it's also really tempting to be Duke because of the access to magic. This is actually one of the first books that I read this year. Like, seriously, this is one of the first books I read. I think it was the second book I read this year, and it's still making its way into my favorite books of the year. It was just such a good book. I don't think I've ever read anything really like it. Mystery, fantasy, politics, and it takes place over such a short period of time, but it feels so long at the same time. I loved it. I'm still thinking about it, and it's been almost a year since I read it. I'm pretty sure I finished this book on like January 3rd or something like that of 2024. I think it's fantastic. Once again, I've never heard anyone talk about this book, but I think a lot of people need to read this one. And then another one that is actually one of my more recent reads is Of Jade Dragons. And Of Jade Dragons is promoted as being a young adult fantasy, but I don't actually believe it's a fantasy. But in it we follow Ying. And Ying has wanted to join the Engineers Guild her entire life, but women are not allowed inside the guild. But her father, who was once a part of the guild, has trained her and like taught her the art of engineering anyway, so she has quite a bit of talent under her belt. But then one day her father is murdered and she has a pendant from the killer, and she just cannot stay on her island nation any longer, so she travels to the capital in search of her father's murderer. But when she gets there, she learns that the Engineers Guild is like opening up for their apprenticeship right now, where it's like this competition with all these engineers getting together, seeing if they can prove that they're worth being entered into the Engineers Guild. And while she's traveling, she has been disguised as a young man and using one of her younger brother's names. So she thinks, well, I'm here already, I might as well join the Engineers Guild. And she also meets one of the crown princes, and he's like, I will help you enter the Engineers Guild because you can go in as my competitor, because some of his older brothers also have people that they have chosen to enter, so they get automatic entrance and don't have to like go through the process of trying to enter. He's like, you'll be my pick, but it'll make it harder for you. And he knows that she is a girl, but she has to keep her identity hidden. It's also classified as a silkpunk fantasy, which is like steampunk, but instead inspired by Eastern philosophy, art, and materials. And I've never read anything like that before, and I thought it was really, really good. Like, I won't describe this book as a fantasy because to me, fantasy means magic, and this book has no magic in it. But it's like that great classic YA fantasy vibe. Like, It's fast-paced, there's always something happening, there's a romance, there's politics, but not politics that are like really complicated, unlike The Winter's Duke. It's accessible politics. It's more so in the background because our character isn't political. And like there's that mystery element of her still trying to figure out who killed her father, but also the competition and training element of being in the Engineers Guild. I really, really enjoyed this one. I thought it was really great. I'm really excited to see where this series goes because this is a series that's currently coming out. I believe the second book is coming out in like May, but I could be completely wrong about that, but I am really excited to read it when I'm able to. And the last book that I don't have physically here with me that I want to talk about is the one that I have actually read before. So this was the reread, and this was The Cruel Prince. In The Cruel Prince, we follow our main character, Jude, and Jude is a human being living in the realm of fairy because both of her parents were murdered by her adopted father when she was a young girl. So she has a half-sister who is daughter of her adopted father and her mother, and she has a full sister as well. And her adopted father has treated her rather well. She gets an education, she's not treated as like some of the humans are in fairy, like she's a part of his family. But she can't help but want a little bit more and gets entangled in these political things and gets entangled a little bit with Carden, who is one of the king's children. And Carden is a bit of a jerk, but he is a part of the court, and the court is what she wants to work for. People love these ones. I haven't read the rest of the series yet. It is on my 2025 TBR because I would like to finish it. And I loved this book when I read it. But the first time I read it, I absolutely hated it. I don't know what was going on. It was around the time, like it was back closer to when it first came out. I was in high school back then. It was a long time ago that I read these books, really. Well, when I read this book. And I didn't like it at the time. But on the reread, because I decided to give it a second chance because so many people on BookTube love this book, so I decided to give it a second chance, and I'm so glad that I did because I really, really enjoyed it. Once again, it's young adult fantasy with some politics mixed in, but also lots of adventure and lots of things. It's just a lot. Like, it's really, really fun. I'm really excited to see where the trilogy goes now. I'm so excited I gave it a second chance, but because I disliked it so much the first time, that's why it's allowed into this ranking, even though I've technically read it before. And so the next book is Guardians of the Dawn Sahara, and I have actually a full video talking about are there any books that are comparable to Guardians of the Dawn Sahara. So Guardians of the Dawn Sahara takes place in a world where magic has been outlawed because magicians were turning into monsters. And our main character, Sahara, lives with her stepmother and stepsister, her stepsister who is blind and who she takes care of. But Sahara has magic that is illegal, that is not allowed, and she doesn't know how to control it very well because she doesn't know how to access the language of magic. But one day she runs into another person and their books get mixed up, and when she opens the book, she finds that it is one of the languages of magic that will help her learn how to use it. And she learns that there is a whole group called Guardians of the Dawn, which are to help magicians and to help the regular people of this world. And so she gets enwrapped with the Guardians of the Dawn and wrapped up with the person who accidentally traded books with her as well. But things are kind of dangerous for her, and she feels like she owes her stepmother everything because her stepmother has keeping her safe all these years. I think this is really, really good. Once again, young adult fantasy. There's a romance in here. There's some politics in here, but since, once again, our main character isn't involved in those politics, it's a bit more accessible, not like, oh my god, there's so much happening right now. I know some people, this wasn't their favorite, but I just think this is just so much fun. Guardians of the Dawn, Amy, I don't know how it's pronounced. That one came out this year. I just unfortunately haven't been able to get my hands on it to read it quite yet, but I'm really excited to continue on with this quartet. I really want to see where it goes, and I'm just really excited about it. I think these are a lot of fun, and I really like this author. I've read one other book by her, really liked it, and this is just a really fun time. Like, if you want a bit more serious or a bit more plot in your books, I would say probably skip it. But if you just are looking for a good time, I would definitely recommend this one. And my last book in the 8s category, which is so close to being 9, that I kind of go back and forth on it. But for now, it's sticking with the 8s. It is The Wicked Deep. In this book, we are in like more of a current world. I don't know if it's totally current because I don't think people really have cell phones, but more of a modern world, and this takes place in Sparrow, Oregon. And Sparrow, Oregon's kind of just known for one thing, and that is the swan season. And the swan season takes place every June 1st to every summer solstice. And that is because of the Swan Sisters. The Swan Sisters were drowned in the harbor a long time ago after being accused of witchcraft. But every summer they come back and they possess the bodies of 3 girls, and they do not know they're possessed, and they drown as many boys as they can during the swan season, doing what was done to them in this time. It's got more of that gothic fantasy type of flair. Like, I wouldn't call it overly fancy other than like they're coming back year after year. But it's just so good. It was written so well. I was super like shocked by things that happened in this book because we start on like the day before the swan season starts. But it's just so good. I loved it so much. I thought it was so thrilling. And I just didn't want to put this book down when I was reading it. I don't want to say much more about it because I don't want to give the story away. But trust me, The Wicked Deep is not one that you want to miss, especially if you love a more creepy vibe. And those were it for my 8s. So now let's move on to the 9s and talk about my very favorites of the year. First up is actually Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Wrath of the Triple Goddess. Now, these senior year adventures trilogy books, I really enjoy them, but I don't think they're really as special as the original 5. And I enjoyed Chalice of the Gods, but Wrath of the Triple Goddess was so much better in my opinion. In this like quick little trilogy, we are following Percy, and Percy wants to go to college in New Rome, but Zeus is demanding that he fulfills 3 quests by 3 different gods in order to enter New Rome University. And so he has more simple quests around Manhattan, and this Halloween season, Hecate wants to go around the world and go to all these festivals that are dedicated to her, and she just wants him to pet sit her 2 pets, Gale the polecat and Hecuba the dog. What kind of dog is she? Does it say? Oh, she's a hellhound. That's what I forgot. And Hecuba the hellhound. And they both used to be human beings that worshipped Hecate. But things kind of go awry and Percy ends up losing them, which turns this into a really high stakes adventure story around Manhattan. This was so good. This reminds me of why I love that universe so much. Like, I had read, obviously I'd reread Percy Jackson and the Olympians, and I love those, but like, this one was so close to being there. Like, it really was. I thought this was really special. I thought the idea was so good. I just loved it. I also loved how much we saw Sally Jackson in this one and learned maybe a little bit more about her and everything. I enjoyed this one so much. I thought it was so good, and he was just so witty, but also so self-loathing in the way that Percy is, because he doesn't really think he's good enough. And I just loved seeing him that way. Like, I love Percy. We love our Percy in the Percy Jackson fandom. Name a more popular main character in any media anywhere. I'll wait. No one loves Percy the way we love Percy here in the fandom. And I loved Percy Jackson, The Wrath of the Triple Goddess. There's not much more to say on that. Next up, I have The Once and Future Witches. And in this book, we follow 3 sisters who have been separated for quite some time, but then they are brought back together in New Salem. And New Salem is going through a lot of political turmoil right now. And this is also more of a historical fiction because it takes place during the women's suffrage movement. But these 3 sisters decide to take the women's suffrage movement and to make it into the witchcraft movement because they believe women have power. And this shocked me. I love this so much. Like, I just wanted to drink this book. And the thing it says on the inside is, there's no such thing as witches, but there will be. Like, this is the perfect, like, fall time read. This is the perfect fall time read. It's witchy, it's spooky, there's some politics, but not in the politics that we're used to in, like, young adult fantasy, because this is adult fantasy, and it's a bit more modern than those, like, kingdoms stuff. And we follow witchcraft over the ages, and, like, family that was lost and then found again. This is so good. This is such a good book. And, like, I've been wanting to read this book for years, and I've just never gone around to it. I've seen it in the bookstore, and then I was like, I'll get it next time. But I'm so glad to have read this, and I'm so glad that I actually own it, because this is definitely a book I will reread in the future. And next up is another middle grade fantasy, and that is The Girl Who Drank the Moon. And this one, there's a lot of things happening because we follow multiple perspectives. On this town in the forest, once a year a baby is left out in the woods in the certain clearing for the witch who lives in the woods, because everyone thinks she's evil, and if they don't do this, then she will punish them. But Zan, the witch in the woods, isn't actually evil, and she's kind of confused as to why babies are always left out in the woods. But she always takes the baby and she takes it across the woods / swamp to the other side, to this other town where they are known as the Star Children. And they're known as the Star Children because Zan feeds them starlight on the way there to help them be satiated, to feed them, but also makes them really talented and kind of glow later on in life. So people love the Star Children. But one year, Zan accidentally feeds the child moonlight instead of starlight, which makes the child magical. So Zan has to take in this child on her own, and we follow that girl's story. We have, like, that bit at the beginning, but then we have so much more. This was truly special. This book made me tear up, and even though I'm gonna mention it a couple more times, that book's made me tear up. I'm not a crier when it comes to books. Like, I'm really not. Like, even harrowing things can happen and I still won't cry. Like, I'll cry at a children's animated movie at a drop of a hat. I've cried during Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem twice. I've seen it twice, and I cried both times. But for some reason, books just don't really make me cry. But this book really got me close. It made my eyes well up in tears. It's so emotional, it's so beautiful, the prose is beautiful. This is so special. Don't write it off because you just think it's a children's book. It's really so magical, and just, like, if I had read this book as a child, like, I don't know what I would have done, but I wish I had read it as a child. It was so good. And also one of the books I read really early on this year in 2024. And I'm so glad that I've read this book, and I'm so glad it's still, like, one of my favorites, even after everything else I've read this year. It's just so good. How many times can I say that in one video, really? And up next we have A Feather So Black, and this is a romantasy young adult novel. And this one we follow Fia, and Fia is different because she is a changeling. Right around the time that she was born, there was a war between humans and the Fae, and the Fae decided to close all the portals between the Fae world and the mortal world, but a lot of girls were kidnapped and replaced before that, including the crown princess. But most of the changelings, they just ended up being sticks and rocks and such. But Fia is Fae, and she sticked around, and she was the one who replaced the crown princess. But instead of getting rid of her, the queen decides to raise her as her own and raise her to do jobs for her and to basically be a spy master for her. But then one day the queen learns that there is actually a 13th gate into the Fae world, and she wants Fia to go into the Fae world and to bring her daughter back, as well as another secret mission. But the catch is that she has to go with her sisters, the queen's real daughter's betrothed, who she is in love with, but he doesn't really understand her, and he left her. But she has to go with him in order to get back her sister, the queen's daughter. And also fulfill her quest without letting him know. And this takes place over a long period of time. This takes place like over like a year, because they can only enter this gate on the nights of full moons or no moons, one of those things. They can only enter into the Fae world on those nights. This is so magical. This is what romantasy should be. Romantasy has kind of turned into just romance with a side of fantasy. This is fantasy plot. This is turmoil. This is pining. This is torture. This is harrowing things happening with romance. That's not where romantasy is now. If you like The Court of Thorns and Roses and you're reading all these other books, like, this is just physical attraction and whatnot, this is the one you need to read. I'm so excited. I'm really hoping that the rest of the series goes really well, because this book is really a standout. Next up is A Dark and Drowning Tide, and this is a dark academia fantasy book, and in it we follow Lorelei, and Lorelei is a folklorist, and she goes to this college where she is being mentored by a very prestigious person, but unfortunately her academic rival is Sylvia, who is also a folklorist, and she is kind of obsessed with her. Like, Lorelei is obsessed with Sylvia. But then there is an expedition that is called forth by the king for her mentor, and that is to find the Everspring, which is the original source of magic and is still very powerful. And the folklorists are called in because they will be able to find this mythical spring more likely than anyone else. But the king also makes them bring along these 5 other nobles. So Sylvia makes 6 nobles. Sylvia makes 6 nobles, so it's Lorelei, her mentor, and the 6 nobles. Because Sylvia has been friends with all these people, including the king, their entire lives. And Lorelei is deemed to be lower class and less worthy than them. But early on the expedition, her mentor is murdered, which leads Lorelei to lead the expedition and also figure out the murder, and her and Sylvia must work together in both of these aspects. This is so good. I love this so much. I will definitely be rereading this. I'll be rereading all of these, let's be honest. But this was so good. It's so magical. This is the epitome of being obsessed with somebody. I wish this book were twice as long, so we got even more interactions and even more magical things and even more folklore. And once again, I've seen like no one talk about this. I've seen no one talk about A Feather So Black either, by the way. Like, what's up? What's up with y'all? Why aren't you reading these things? This is great. This is what we should be reading. This. Put the other things down, read this. This is so good. I wish it were twice as long so we got to see even more. Like, I really wish that. Which is why it isn't my favorite book of the year, because I do want it to be twice as long. But I think this is really special. And I'm also really interested now in this author's other work, so I'll definitely be reading more of this author's work in 2025. And we're getting down to the wire here, but next I want to talk about The Dragon's Promise. And The Dragon's Promise is the sequel to 6 Crimson Cranes, and in 6 Crimson Cranes we follow Shiori, and Shiori is princess because her father is the emperor and she has 6 older brothers. But then one day she is cursed, so she has a wooden bowl placed upon her head that she cannot take off, and her brothers are turned into 6 crimson cranes, so they have crimson crowns on their heads, and if she says a word, one of her brothers will die. And she also cannot tell anyone who she is. So she must go on this quest to first find her brothers and then to figure out how to break their curse. And 6 Crimson Cranes is such a beautiful story. But The Dragon's Promise, I think, was even better. It was beautiful. It was lovely. I loved learning more about my favorite character in this series. I don't think there's a better way to end this. And like, the ending of this literally made me cry. This one made me cry. Like, cry. It was so beautiful. I'll definitely be rereading this duology in the future. How many times can I say that? But I think everyone needs to give this duology a try. I don't think enough people talk about it, especially this one. I don't think I've ever seen anyone mention The Dragon's Promise, but it was beautiful. And like, literally the ending, like, this book tried to tear out my heart and crumble it to dust. And then it gave me happiness. Like, what? How can you hurt me so and bring me so much joy at the same time? The last two books I have here are my favorite books of the year because they are tied for first place because they are of the same duology. And without a shadow of a doubt, my favorite books this year were A River Enchanted and A Fire Endless. I have thought about these books so much since I've read them. A River Enchanted's the first one, so that's the one we're mostly going to talk about. In A River Enchanted, we follow Jack, and Jack is a bard, but Jack has left his island home for a while to go to train to be a bard, and now he is training other musicians. And the one who paid for this is his lord, because Jack has no father, and so he is treated very unwell by other people on the island. But his lord has summoned him back home, and he must go because his lord has given everything for him, including paying for his education. But when Jack returns, he learns the reason that he is called back is that several young girls on this island are going missing, and they need to be able to communicate with the spirits of the island to figure out what is going on. But the only way to communicate with the spirits is through music, and Jack is the only one on this side of the aisle who can play music. But he also must go about this quest and to find these missing girls along with his old menace, who is the Lord's daughter, and that is Adira. These books will make you believe in love. These books are so beautiful. These books are also equal. Sometimes with duologies, one book is way better than the other, or you think it should just be one book. These books are completely and utterly equal. They're full of love, and they're full of romance and compassion, and the prose is so beautiful. Like, I still think about some of the lines of this book, and I'm still thinking about the ending of A Fire Endless because it tried to destroy me. Like, teared up so bad reading this. It was everything. Like, I'm just gonna think about these books forever. I want to reread them, and I just read them a few months ago. Like, I think these are new favorite books of all time for me. Like, I just don't understand how I could love anything more than these. Other than Percy Jackson, obviously, but like, this is everything. If you don't like young adult romance if you don't like young adult fantasy romance, then you need to read these, because these are adult fantasy romances, and they're beautiful. This is about pining and love and music and talents and secrets, and it's just so wonderful. And with that, those are all the books that I love this year. These were the best books, in my opinion, of 2024. Barely any of them came out in 2024, but these were my absolute favorites of the year. I loved just gushing about these so much, and now I really need a drink of water. Leave down in the comments below what your favorite book of 2024 was, and also if you're interested in reading any of these books in the future, I would love to know. Also, you can give this video a like. I would really appreciate it, and you can subscribe because I'm still going to try to post a lot in the upcoming year and not really abandon you guys again like I did earlier this year, and I would really appreciate it if you were here. So yeah, I guess I'm signing off now. Okay, bye.